Hello and welcome to another edition of the Iain Dale All Talk podcast. I'm Iain Dale. Today we're going to be talking to somebody who you will all know. He's been around the top of British politics for many, many years. It's Tim Farron, former leader of the Liberal Democrats. And you're still on the Liberal Democrat front bench, aren't you, Tim?
Well, there's nowhere else to be.
That's commitment.
Well, we haven't got a backbench. Or maybe we're all backbenchers.
Are you still enjoying your politics?
Yeah, I love it. I think over the years you begin to develop different passions. The thing that really got me the bug, if you like, when I was 16 was being introduced to a bunch of little old ladies in the town of Leyland, near where I lived. And having joined the Liberals for all sorts of, high-minded, idealistic reasons, I got connected with these people who did pavement politics. And I loved the fact that it was practical and it was about serving people. And, that is 35 years ago now. And that's what motivates me now, perversely. That's kind of what I first was interested in, and it's what keeps me going now. So I love serving the community in the patch that I'm blessed to represent up in the Lakes and in the Dales. I enjoy being in Parliament and being able to influence things. And also, it's a glorious thing not to have any real ambition. I don't. Obviously, I've no desire to hold any other office than to be the MP for our patch, and that gives you real freedom. It's really liberating.
But when you've been party leader, it must be quite an adjustment to then, from one day, you're at the centre of attention. I mean, obviously you were fighting the 2017 election campaign, and then almost immediately your life changes completely. Now, it was your decision, but even so, that must be quite an adjustment to make.
Yes, and I only spent 2 years as leader, but I spent 4 years before that as party president during the 4 of the 5 years that we were in coalition government. So in one sense it wasn't a massive change going from president to leader. It was quite a big change going from leader to not being leader again. But having said all of that, I think it was a real privilege to be party leader. I felt like a duty, an important thing to do, particularly in the aftermath of the absolute shellacking we got in 2015, and we needed rebuilding and remotivating, all the rest of it. So it was a great and important duty to fulfil. But it's an absolute joy to be the MP for where I am. I love doing what I do. I love serving the communities, and I'm not just saying that because I think some of them might be listening. I'm saying it because it gets me up in the morning, the idea that you can make a difference, help people who've got no one else to turn to. So it's, you do see some people who have been prime ministers or ministers, and they've, for whatever reason, end up on the backbenches, and they look kind of crestfallen and disappointed and like they're doing a relegated version of what they wanted to do. I've never felt like that at all.
So you didn't have any sort of psychological adjustment to make?
I kind of stepped down just before the summer, so you have a summer break and all the rest of it. I think, insofar as there was a psychological adjustment, it was what I've said. It was a real kind of sense of liberty. Not that I was constrained in what I said and all that, so much as the fact that whatever. The reality is that there is ambition in politics, and for whatever reason, good and not so good, I had ambition and wanted to lead the party. I did. It was done. I, mostly enjoyed it. Think I did some worthwhile things and, failed in other respects. But the point is, I enjoy doing what I'm doing now. I enjoy being the MP for Westmorland and Lonsdale, and perhaps it took me to be leader to realise what my real calling in politics was, which is just to serve people and do it to the best of my ability.
Because you can almost divide MPs into two categories, can't you? Those who genuinely love the constituency side and those who view the constituency as just a stepping stone to greater things. And I think you certainly get that possibly more in the two main parties than maybe in the Liberal Democrats, because most Liberal Democrat MPs, you certainly got elected because you did the pavement politics, and plenty of your colleagues did. But maybe in the other parties that doesn't happen quite so much.
Well, it's interesting. I think, you look at people. I mean, Theresa May is an interesting case in point. We don't know if she's going to stay in Parliament. There's various rumours about her. But I think she is settling into a really interesting role. A role of being a wise, sometimes carefully outspoken person. I look at people like Ian Duncan Smith, who's a very interesting interesting character because he led his party for a relatively short period of time, didn't go through a general election, and that was nearly 20 years ago.
No.
And he stayed in Parliament and chosen to do things that he was passionate about. Now he ended up back in cabinet, which is probably not a thing he expected to do. So I think, I've got huge admiration for Iain Duncan Smith because of that, really. Whereas others, obviously David Cameron scuttled off, so did Tony Blair. And
Cameron actually didn't intend to. But
is that right?
Yeah, he intended to stay. But because of Brexit, he just felt like a complete fish out of water, and he just thought he would remain the focus and just decided, no, that's it. I think I should go. But I think in a way, I think he regrets it now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a shame, really, in many ways. I think that, when all said and done, surely we all know that our time in Parliament is temporary, and your time in whatever office you might hold as a leader or a Prime Minister or a cabinet member or whatever, that is all temporary as well. I guess, as you say, it depends on how you've got in. And for a lot of people, and for some parties, the battle is getting yourself selected for a seat that you can win. It's not that you then do nothing to serve your communities. Some very good MPs in safe seats, don't get me wrong. But the need to forensically love your patch to death isn't the same. And so when you've climbed the greasy pole, you've held ministerial office, you've held cabinet office, maybe you've been Prime Minister, and then you're back on the back benches, people will perhaps feel that constituency is not enough for them. For me, I've always loved it. And I suppose, being a Liberal Democrat, you asked me if I was, enjoying being on the front bench because there is nowhere else to be. There's 12 of us again now. That's exciting. But I've been part of the largest ever Liberal Democrat grouping since Lloyd George and the smallest. And it's been...
not quite the smallest.
No, 1970, yes. Quite right. I just remember that when I said it. But certainly the Liberal Democrat, of the Liberal Democrat groupings, the largest and the smallest. And so when you're part of a group, fewer than 20... then everyone's got to play their part. There's no room for prima donnas or for elder statespersons. You've just got to take on a bunch of briefs and be a team player.
Did you identify your constituency as the one that you wanted to get? Because you are from that area. But it was... Tim Collins was the Conservative MP. I don't think anybody in the Conservative Party really thought that he could lose that. And you fought it in 2001.
And won, yeah.
And then won in 2005 by a very, very narrow majority, and then built up some stupendous majorities, which has sort of slightly declined now. But did you always think that you could win it?
So I think, first of all, I joined the Liberals as a 16-year-old, and even as idealistic and ambitious as one, not the Liberals, or did you join the Liberals?
I did join the Liberals.
Well, there you go.
1978.
Now, there you are. Mine's a little bit like... I always say, and by the way, I do get on well with him and wish him very well because he's not been well. I met Derek Draper 5 minutes before I joined the Liberal Party because he's on the Labour Club stall at my sixth form. And I talked to Derek and thought... not joining the Labour Party. I've said that to him to his face, so don't worry. And but I was even as a 16-year-old, I knew joining the Liberals was not a great career move. So if you'd asked me, did I want to be an MP at 16 or 18 or 20 or something, and I said, oh yeah, but only in the same way I'd have said yeah if you'd asked me if I wanted to play for Blackburn Rovers. It was not going to happen.
I think this is really interesting because I knew Jeremy Thorpe a bit, and I've read quite a lot about him. And when in the 1950s, when he was at Oxford, or was it late 1940s? Can't remember. But he had that decision to make, and he had a very Tory background. And if he had decided to join the Tory party, I'm pretty sure he would have become a Tory cabinet minister. But he didn't.
Yeah.
And he fought North Devon, I think in 1951, and then 55, and then won it in 1959.
Yeah.
But he must have gone through thinking, well, should I stay here? Should I just continue with the law or whatever? And you did the same thing. Norman Lamb did the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think, so two things, really. It's interesting what you say about Jeremy Thorpe, because I do remember thinking, as a teenager, and I mean this with no offence at all to Labour and Conservative MPs, But I remember thinking anybody could become a Labour or Tory MP. It's not that hard, There's loads of them. You just got to get yourself selected somewhere. So that's not all that remarkable. It's a bit more remarkable to be one of those awkward Liberals who wins despite gravity. So there was a little bit of that thinking. That's a slightly vain thing to think, and it's also true of how I felt back then. So I stood for Parliament twice where I had no chance of winning. And I think with the Lib Dems, it's standing for unwinnable seats is a different process.
And one of those was against Theresa May.
Against Theresa May, against Hillary Armstrong. Yeah. So she came a bad second and I came a much worse third.
And thinking back, what did you think of Theresa May?
I liked her. And I actually spent a lot of time with her because Hillary Armstrong was a safe Labour seat back then. It's a Tory gain now, of course. She was in Labour's shadow cabinet. 92 was an election that Labour thought they might well win. And so Hillary Armstrong spent her time in places like Tynemouth and Hexham trying to win seats off the Tories and wasn't in her patch much. And there's only 3 candidates. So normally speaking, it was me and a banker in Twinsett and Pearls turning up at, working men's clubs and getting slagged off. And so some 21-year-old kid from up the road and Theresa May. So I liked her and I thought she was straightforward. I thought she was very nice. And so when I saw that she got elected the subsequent general election in 97, I remember feeling really pleased for her, thinking, good on you. So no, I liked her then. I stood again in 97. I think the point I'm making about why the standing for unwinnable seats for Lib Dems is different than in the Labour Party and the Tory Party is there isn't a career structure. I flew the flag in 92 for North West Durham because I was asked and they were desperate, and I thought it'd be a cool thing to do when I was 21. And in 97, I stood in South Ribble because I was the county councillor for the main town there, and someone had to fly the flag. And I spent most of my time defending my county council seat in the weekdays and helping Ronnie Fern in Southport at the weekend. So Westmorland and Lonsdale came about for a bunch of reasons, really. My work with Lancaster University were involved working in Ambleside quite a lot, which is obviously in the constituency. And I met a girl called Rosie who lived just outside the patch, and we did our courting in Kirkby Lonsdale inside the constituency. Rosie's my wife now. And so I think that those things sort of slowly but surely meant I had a focus in an area where we come a decent second. And I thought, I ought to have a crack at least once at somewhere I might win. And so I set down roots, and I thought, there were times after 2001 where I did think about giving it in, because it's, having a full-time job.
Why didn't you?
Because some good people told me not to, because I thought I stood a chance.
Norman Lamb thought about doing that when he lost for the second time, and I think it was Shirley Williams said, no, you need to do this one more time.
Yeah. And I had that. So a very good friend of mine, Hilary Stevenson, who was the agent in Hazel Grove, and should have been ennobled. And if I'd been allowed to put people in the Lords, I'd have stuck her in the Lords.
I think you got quite enough people in the Lords.
But I got to put 0 in. So it's all my fault. Me, Vince and Joe got to put nobody in the Lords. And if I did, she'd probably been top of my list. But, just because she'd been through the same thing with Andrew Sunnell in 92, where they lost by 900 in Hazel Grove, and had another crack at it. And I do remember, so having persuaded me to keep going, Eva Pole, Hillary, who was a sort of retired psychology A-level teacher, I remember asking her, and Eva Pole said, how does this feel? And she said, it feels like Hazel Grove in 92. You might win and you might not. I thought, okay. And we went back to the office, and there stood in front of me was a box full of Good Morning leaflets for the village of Staveley, just north of Kendal, which is one of our strongest areas. So about 750 leaflets there. And we just looked at each other. And my heart sank, I thought, because they need to go out. And she just looked at me and she said, do you want to win? I said, yeah. So I rang up 5 little old ladies, because they all were, and certainly not one of them was under 70. And I said, fancy getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning? They all said yes. And the following night, for the first time since 1906, we won the seat by 267 votes. And so they all know that they single-handedly won the seat for us.
Absolutely, yeah. There's always someone like that who claims.
And they were right. They were right.
You've always. I described you once some time ago to somebody as you've got a remarkable ability to always appear positive and sort of a bit effervescent. You're not somebody I imagine has sort of big sloughs of depression. There's very little that would get you down, or is it a bit of a front?
It's not a front, but I think I get miserable like anybody else from time to time. But I just think that, one has to look at how you can get the best out of any situation. Don't worry about stuff you can't affect, and the stuff you can affect, don't worry about it. Do something about it.
And you've also got this sort of cheeky chappy, trust me, I'm a northerner type of appearance, which I think is, in politics, a really, really important thing, because people, I think, just have an innate distrust of politicians as a species. And if there is something about your character, the way that you come across, that promotes trust, that is a tremendous asset. Have you always been aware that you've got that?
No, I mean, I know I heard people say that. I guess there are times when I might have played it up a bit because, but particularly during the coalition years, when I was just, I love Nick Clegg and he did a great job, but we were being painted as being, the half of the Tory party, and Nick was obviously from a fairly well-to-do background, and you can try and sort of offset. But mostly, the best advice I ever got given, which was by Charles Kennedy before my first question time, BBC Question Time, was just be yourself.
Yeah.
Can't catch you out for yourself. But the other thing which I think is important, I've been really blessed by the fact that I don't have to contrive a hinterland. So I joined the Liberals at 16, and I got involved in all the student politics and all that sort of, terribly, terribly earnest stuff at the height of the first wave of political correctness, which we now call wokeness. But I was very politically correct. But I also was surrounded by all my mates who I was in a band with or played football with, who didn't give two hoots about politics and called me a plonker for being involved in it. And it was just good to have them. And so you're having an earnest political debate one day. You're writing some crap song in your mate's bedroom the next day. You're running a jumble sale with some little old ladies in Leyland for the Liberals the next day. It's quite good at keeping you relatively normal.
The coalition years, during that period, I always thought you were almost the internal opposition within the Liberal Democrats, or you sort of came across as that. I think you had the chance to be a minister, but you decided not to. Do you regret that now? No,
I don't. And so, first of all, I didn't make the cut in the first shuffle. And I remember being rung by Alistair Carmichael, my good friend, telling me that I'm sorry, you're not in the first round of ministers. And I was the DEFRA spokesperson for the party, so I might have assumed that I would be.
And if they had offered you something, then would you have taken it?
I'm sure I would have taken it.
Right.
But it's also, you should trust your own instincts. When Alistair told me, I was kind of 1 part miffed and 3 parts relieved. It's funny how you feel, really. I think partly because the election was a tough period. We'd gone through it, and I'd won, I'd held the seat. And I think there's a little bit of self-preservation there. And being a minister would potentially take over your life to a large degree. So I then ran to be deputy leader, you might remember, because Vince had become a cabinet member, so he stepped down. And Simon Hughes has probably been my best friend in politics, stood. And it was an odd thing to stand against him. And it was only an internal election, a bit like the DUP. So it was over quite quickly. But it was quite fun, and I put my marker down. And then the vacancy for party president came up. And that's probably why I was never a minister, probably, although you'd have to ask Nick, really. But I put myself in a slightly reserved occupation, having won the presidency, because he couldn't sack me. and he also couldn't appoint me to anything either.
And we should explain for people who don't know about the internal machinations of the Liberal Democrats. It's actually quite an influential job, isn't it? I mean, you are the voice of the party to the leadership.
Yeah, and we elect directly 2 roles in the party, the leader and the president. And so I was elected president at a time, I guess, when the role of the president was most important and biggest in terms of the number of things we need to do. Because if the person who's leading the party is now running the country, you've then got someone else who needs to do a lot of that rubber chicken circuit stuff, but internal management and what have you. But one of the real problems the party was excited about going into coalition and also deeply conflicted, obviously by things like tuition fees in particular, but even that few months between, the Rose Garden and tuition fees, which I think was the real damaging thing for us, it seriously affected our standing and how we thought of ourselves. And so part of my job was to be a critical friend of the coalition and not to be an opposition to it. We'd chosen to go into coalition. I had my misgivings, but unlike my friends, Charles Kennedy and John Leach, I didn't vote against it when it came to the parliamentary party. I thought it's pretty much the only option on the table that's doable. But I was critical of some of the things we did, of some of the politics of it. But my job was to accentuate the Liberal Democrats because no one else was doing that, because we're focusing upon running the country, which I don't knock Nick for doing. But I think looking back, we didn't think ahead as to what it would do to our brand, our distinctiveness. I've had knocking on. So the Lib Lab Pact happened in 77, 78. And right the way up to 2010, I'd have people saying, I'm not voting for you because you just jump into Labour because what David Steele did with James Callaghan. You think, well, that happened when I was flipping 8. And it wasn't even a coalition. And this was my I'm paraphrasing my contribution to the parliamentary party meeting that made the decision on coalition. I said, if you think this is going to be forgotten, you've got another thing coming. This will affect our reputation, shall we say, for a generation or two. And maybe it won't, actually. I think actually now it isn't the coalition that is damaging to us at all. It's the recovering from the consequences of the coalition that's our problem. It's about infrastructure and relevance and centrality.
I actually think it's different to that. I think the Liberal Democrat problem now is recovering from Brexit. In that, I talk to a lot of Liberal Democrat friends of mine, admittedly the ones who tend to be on the right of the party, who were not happy with Joe Swinson's approach in 2019 and sort of bollocks to Brexit and all of that. In fact, some of them have left the party. Well, Norman Lamb is no longer a Liberal Democrat member, which I was astonished, and largely because of the Liberal Democrat stance on Brexit. And I think that, in a sense, in the short term, might be the saving grace for the Liberal Democrats, in that it slightly pushes the coalition memories to one side. Now, whether people who are not sort of out-and-out Remainers or rejoiners can come back very easily, I don't know. But I mean, it's not just coalition, I think, that is the issue.
So I certainly do push back against those who say that the coalition is tainting us and doing us damage. I think it did in 15. I don't think it did in 17. I think Brexit, in a sense, cleansed that sooner than it might have done otherwise. I think the extent to which coalition affects us is that it took us from 56 seats to 8. And during that 5 years, we lost MSPs, Welsh Assembly members, councillors, and our infrastructure is affected. And we have slowly but surely rebuilt over that time.
Membership has increased.
Membership's increased, absolutely. And we've seen ups and downs with MPs, but we've seen our councillor numbers are stronger than they've been for about 15 years now, and all of that. So I think there's been some recovery. Brexit's an interesting one. I mean, I made a decision. I mean, I would argue I did something that David Cameron never did, which was to plan for what might happen if we lost the referendum. And we had an evening session, 2 or 3 of us, a fortnight out from the referendum, where we thought, right, what do we do if we lose? And we decided to basically, the minute we knew we'd lost the referendum, Tim go to bed, get up as early as possible, and just tour the studios and authentically emote how millions of people will be feeling who've been on the wrong side of the result. And that doubled the party's membership, and I'd argue it saved us and gave us a purpose. I think, however, you've got to keep your ear open to what the public are saying. And the reality is that partly because of Dominic Cummings' cleverness and the Conservative Party's cleverness and the way the public were just getting tired with the whole Brexit thing, that I think that we missed the change in mood, and we perhaps behaved a little bit like we were fighting a PR election. Because, of course, we just had a stonking good result in the European elections in the May. And did we allow that? I think we maybe just got a bit too much of the old hubris there. I didn't think... I mean, I voted for it because I'm a party man, but I'm on the record as saying that I argued against, internally, us calling the early election. Because if you really did want to stop Brexit, bog the so-and-sos down. Actually, as it happens, if we bogged it down, COVID would have come along. Goodness knows what might have happened. We could still be in the EU if that was the objective. I think giving the Conservatives the election when they wanted it was a mistake. And I think lots of people felt that we were... I don't think the position was undemocratic, but it was clearly received as being so. And the language is a bit sort of on the extreme side. And so I think that ended up doing us harm really from the moment the election was called. Now, I don't think it hurts us particularly. And what was interesting in Cheshire and Amersham is that you've got an awful lot of people who voted Liberal Democrat. Yes, partly with a kind of Remain legacy to them, but actually an awful lot of kind of Telegraph readers who probably voted Leave, but just don't like the cut of Boris Johnson's jib. And it's something about integrity in government. I get things like the generic Desmond situation, Priti Patel not being removed for the bullying, for cronyism, things that I didn't expect, Conservative supporters to register. And we often think, these things are having no impact on the polls.
But they aren't. They aren't in the national polls,
and they're apparently not. You're right. So the only places I hear it are on the doorsteps in my patch and on the doorsteps of Cheshire and Amersham. So it has an effect on a certain kind of voter, it would appear.
But what should the Liberal Democrats do now about the EU? Because it seems to me the Labour Party have essentially decided don't mention the war.
Yeah.
And if you do, just make sure you say, well, we've left, that's it. There's no going back.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what the Liberal Democrat stance is on this, because you could become the Rejoin Party.
Yeah. I don't think we need to do that at this moment. I don't think there's a mood for that. But I also think the Labour Party's extreme caution and fear of their own voters, or the people they hope will stay their own voters, is completely paralysing for them. And I think we can be a bit more relaxed. My initial thought was after the election was, we need to not mention the war. The time will come in the future, and we'll make the case, and we're still going to be... we're still going to have join the European Union in our manifesto, because we have every single election since the European Coal and Steel Community was formed, so why wouldn't we carry on? But it won't be front and centre. I do wonder whether things might change in the months and years to come, and certainly a relationship, all this talk about trade deals, when we've got this big block on our doorstep. And Norman Lamb and I did vote for the option of us being in a single market, a customs union outside the European Union, and with only two Lib Dems who did that. I think there may well be a growing view that we might want to inch in that direction. But I don't think it's going to be instant, because there's more politics at work than economics.
Do you think it was a fundamental mistake, both the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party, not to vote for the so-called softer Brexit, staying in the single market and the customs union? Because if Labour had supported that, there were enough Tories to bring that about.
Yes. There are lots of what-ifs. So there's the what-if we hadn't allowed the Tories of the early election. Would the Philip Hammonds of this world and so on have come round to a referendum on the deal, for example, or People's Vote or whatever it got called? Possibly. If the opposition parties had done what just a couple of us did, and vote for a genuinely softer Brexit and membership of the single market, could that have gone through? So yeah, there's lots of what ifs. I think one of the problems for us, and I think this was a mistake, but I understand where it came from, was a fear that Corbyn had the same problems over Brexit as Starmer had, in that he knew that it was off-putting for his voters in the north and in other parts of the country, and yet his membership was wildly Remain and getting really cross with him for not coming out in favour of the people's vote and so on. And we were terrified, it would appear, of Corbyn matching us in being terribly Remainy.
That was never going to happen.
And it didn't happen. And yet I think our party policy shifted to this revoke position because we wanted to stay, more anti-Brexit than Labour. Yeah. And that was an error. I understand why it was made, because you can be principled and you can be clear of your position.
Did you realise it was an error at the time?
I went running on the day of the vote at the conference. I went and did an 8-mile loop to Poole and back, because I thought, former leader in the hole voting against the leadership line, or worse still, speaking against it, bad luck. And we discussed it in the parliamentary party. I think the damage that would have been done, particularly given the Parliamentary Party had sort of fairly largely, almost unanimously got behind it, and the Parliamentary Party, of course, was growing by the day at that point with Luciana Berger and Sam Gyimah and all those very good people. Jo Swinton did a great job in the transfer market. They were top quality people that she brought in. There was a real agreement around the Parliamentary Party table that was the right move. I expressed some doubts, although maybe not as loudly as I should have done, and it was obvious that the deal was done at that point. And I thought, well, I think it's going to do the party damage. Probably, I wasn't certain of it. I'm no clairvoyant. I didn't think that. I wasn't certain that we'd end up in the situation that we did in December 19. I didn't think for sure there would be a general election in December 19 at that point. But I thought more damage would be done if the former leader got up and opposed the current leader. So I went for a run.
Isn't it interesting, though, that the role of the former leader in British politics is such an awkward one, in a way that I don't think it is in many other countries, in that you look at Theresa May at the moment, every time she speaks, it genuinely is heartfelt. I think she's disagreeing with the government's policy. When Margaret Thatcher left office, she did the same to an extent. It always undermined her successor.
Yeah.
How conscious are you of that in whatever you say?
Really, very. And in many ways, I say being, ambition-free is liberating. That's the only aspect that's not liberating, in the sense that, well, if I didn't care, it wouldn't matter. But I do care, and I'm desperate not to be a bad team player and not to let, because you've seen how it's happened, where a former leader or another high-profile person in the party makes the leader's life a misery and difficult. And I don't want to be that kind of git. So, I wrote my autobiography, and I barely got behind it, really, because I just thought, I kept delaying when it was going to come out, because it was during one leadership election or another. We've had several recently, as you know. And I don't want to be the guy who ends up being a pain to the next girl or guy. So that's the only unliberating bit of it. But all that is that's not a bad thing. Wanting to be supportive to your successor or successors, because I've had three.
And how much do they talk to you? Consult you? Ed especially, a lot.
I spoke to Jo, a great deal also. Vince, less so, but that's not because I think Vince was a really solitary person.
He always has been.
But I mean, a wonderful guy, a really wonderful guy. And one of the most entertaining periods of my time in politics was his time as acting leader. So Ming resigned. I was Ming's PPS. And I remember Daisy McAndrew asking me on this Monday night, I come down, it's October, I think, she said, is it true Ming's resigning? I said, I'm the PPS, I think I know. 30 minutes later he resigned.
Close relationship, was it?
So, well, bless him. But Ming had this entourage. He didn't just have a PPS. He had his consular in Archie Kirkwood. He had various, people like Johnny Oates and lots of really, a great staff team around him. A real strong leader's office. So I felt, in every way bruised. Looked at the, I love Ming. Don't get me wrong. I didn't expect it. I was not cross with him. I just thought, aren't I a prat for saying that? So I went and sat in the tea room, and in shuffles Vince. He says, I think I'm acting leader now. I said, I think you are. And he said, would you be my acting PPS? I said, yes, that'd be lovely. And so what?
Just do me a favour, though. If you're going to resign, tell me in advance.
Yeah, well, that was Ming who'd resign, and Vince. Yes, exactly. So your point. So obviously, Vince fairly quickly decided he wasn't going to stand. And that
which he's regretted ever since.
Well, in one sense, but I think it was the making of him. Because, of course, when Charles Kennedy stepped down, Ming was the acting leader.
You mean when he was knifed in the back?
Well, you can argue, yes. But that vacancy happened, and Ming was deputy leader, so he was acting leader and a candidate. So he was absolutely hammered from all sides and undermined. But when Vince was acting leader, he wasn't a candidate, and therefore it was in the interest of the media to build him up so that these two squirts that followed him, whichever one it was going to be, would be, look poor in contrast. But the great thing was, so I remember Ming, wonderful parliamentary performer, but he didn't enjoy PMQs particularly. It was great, but it took half the week to prepare. It was a great, real focus for him. Whereas other debates, he'd just breeze. And And then, so we'd like turn up on 8:30 on a Wednesday morning. The briefing would start, and it wouldn't be until 11:30 that we actually got ready to go into the chamber, and all real rigmarole. Vince would sort of rock up at 11:15 and have a cup of tea with him. He'd tell me what my question was and go, yeah, sounds good. And my only contribution really to his absolute greatness was the morning of the Mr. Bean quote. So he obviously said to Gordon Brown that he'd morphed from Joe Stalin to Mr. Bean, which is a really damaging point in Gordon Brown's latter end of his career, but also was the making of Vince in some ways. He said, I've come up with this line in the bath. And he said, Rachel, my wife, Rachel thinks it's beneath me. What do you think? I said, it's not beneath you, use it. That's my entire role.
On the basis that you would have done.
I would have done, yeah, go for it. And it was funny. That was fun. And so Vince is just a relatively solitary person, but a really gifted person and a very nice guy, a very shy person for a politician.
Let's talk about your faith, because most politicians shy away from talking about faith. I mean, there are one or two Conservatives that have done over the years, but I mean, there is I think a Conservative parliamentary prayer group that meets each morning, which nobody really knows about. And you're thinking, well, why don't they know about it? Why is it in this country that politicians generally shy away from talking about their faith? Well,
Iain, I also have a podcast, not quite as famed as this at this stage. Yes, it's called A Mucky Business, and I do it for Premier Radio, but it goes out on its own. And my guest this week is a guy called Michael Weir, who is Barack Obama's faith advisor, who is a white evangelical Christian and a Democrat. How weird. And one of the things we discussed is in the United States, according to Michael, who obviously knows loads better than I do, in the United States, in both houses of Congress, there is one single solitary publicly declared atheist, just the one. And so it's almost that in the United States, you've got to make up a faith to be taken seriously. And in the UK, a little bit more, you've got to pretend you haven't got one. I think, so I talk about it because I'm asked about it, but I probably... So I became a Christian when I was 18. It was a kind of in my view, it was I was surprised to become a Christian. I was very much a kind of liberal, secular. I wasn't an atheist, but I thought people who fell for it and took it too seriously were to be seriously suspected. I had one mate at sixth form called Jack, who was kind of the college Christian. Really liked him, but I thought his faith was weird, unattractive, and probably untrue. And it struck me when I was 18, oh, blimey, it's true.
What was that moment?
I was actually reading several books in Singapore. My mum, who worked for Preston Poly, got seconded to teach at a college that failed miserably. And I went there during the gap between A-level and university, not knowing whether I was going to go to university or not, because I didn't know what my A-levels were going to be. And the house we got stuck in, the room I was in, still had the books of the previous couple who were lecturers, who were tenants of that house. And I read them, and there was stuff on what you might call apologetics, so evidence for the resurrection and for Christ, A, existing, B, having said what he said, and C, them being true. I remember thinking, oh, flipping heck, it's true. So I, put my trust in Jesus. And when I got into my 20s, I lapsed because it's hard work. I lapsed for all the reasons that young men sometimes lapse, shall we say. So I unbackslid, oddly enough, having read...
Let's go into all of those details.
Let's not.
I thought I'd lulled you into a full sense of security already.
But the person who made me unlapse or unbackslide would hate to know that it was him, but he's a great hero of mine, is Carl Sagan, massive atheist, who is absolutely one of my pin-ups. Because I'm a science nut. As a kid, I loved all the kind of Voyager stuff, and I loved his human way of speaking about complex, scientific things. And he was an avowed, quite committed atheist. And he did a programme I remember called Cosmos, and a book went alongside it called Cosmos, and I read it on holiday in Spain when I was 32. That's 2002. And he kept coming back chapter after chapter in this book, or at least it felt like it to me, maybe I was just very sensitive to it, that, Christianity in particular, but religion in general, had held humanity back. And I remember thinking, that's not why I've fallen away. I've fallen away not because Christianity isn't true, but because Christianity is inconvenient, and that's not intellectually defensible. So that might explain.
Because you like committing sins,
but don't we all? And so and I think in the end so I became an MP in 2005, maybe 2 or 3 years after I'd unbackslid, and there was a sense in which I kind of probably felt, I need to pin my colours to the mast. But it's interesting, you said there's Conservative Party prayer groups. I mean, I belong to a little Bible study group, which is Labour, Lib Dem, Tory, SNP, Independent, and it's a great thing to belong to. It helps you to remember. I mean, they don't need to be Christians for me to remember this, but the fact that we have a lot more in common, and it's good to see beyond party boundaries. It's good to spend time in a confidential space, really, where you show genuine concern for others and you find out about how they're
many
going.
MPs are members of this?
Well, it's quite cellular, so I couldn't tell you in total, but my group has up to a dozen. Probably half a dozen at any given time.
But people still think that's weird, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, it is weird. Christianity's countercultural, isn't it?
Well, it absolutely is nowadays, but how has it influenced your political views?
I think... So, first of all, I think it deepens... I don't think for a minute the people who don't believe in God or believe in Christ are less moral, by the way. I don't think that at all. But I do think that... So, for me, there's something about creation. So I talked about I'm a space nerd. And so these things fill me with great awe. And all these glorious, cosmic objects. The creation story tells us that unlike every other part of the creation, human beings are made in God's image. And therefore, they are awesomely, spectacularly important. And so however awesome, a pulsar might be, or a galaxy, or a supermassive black hole, or the Lake District Fells, or anything glorious you can imagine, however glorious and awesome that might be, you, Iain Dale, are more important and more valuable than that. And if you think human beings if you really believe in a God who thinks that highly of every single human being, then their well-being, whether they know you care or not, is of ultimate importance.
But what I don't get, and this is where I've never said I'm an atheist because I can't prove that God doesn't exist, but nor can I prove that he does. So I always say I'm an agnostic, which many people think is a bit of a cop-out. No. And I think atheism is a form of religion, actually, because people get very, very attached to the idea. Yeah. But you said earlier that you're a science nut. What I don't get is how can you look at the world of science where you have provable things one way or another and then effectively believe that God created the Earth in 7 days?
So I think, was it Johannes Kepler who was also, I can't remember if he was attacked by the church or by, secularists who are also scientists, but his answer was, I'm just thinking God's thoughts after him. And so I don't have any doubt. I mean, obviously, most things in science are theories, but pretty clearly, true. So I don't for 1 minute have any crisis of faith over the Big Bang or evolution or any of that sort of stuff. I think the Bible tells you everything you need to know and not everything. And so that stuff doesn't trouble me in the slightest.
In the latter stages of the 2017 election campaign, you got into all sorts of trouble. I say you got yourself into trouble. There was part of me that thought the media got you into quite a lot of trouble over your views of whether gay sex was a sin or not. Now, this is all in the distant past to me, but I can remember thinking at the time, I really want to interview you. And I think we had an interview arranged, and then for whatever reason, it didn't happen. Yeah. Now, if I'm honest, there was part of me that was quite relieved that it didn't happen because I knew that I was really going to have to do one of those interviews that... Yeah. Well, how did that all come about, and how uncomfortable was that all for you?
So I think, obviously, hugely uncomfortable because in the end, that I've said what I think about all human beings, about them being equal and being of incredible lofty value, and that's how I think of them in a very real way, not in an intellectual way. But when you're asked a question from a perspective which is probably not understanding what the question means, it's very difficult. And so I don't think when you're a leader of a party which, is fighting the first election where we weren't even in the top 3, so 90 seconds of oxygen and publicity a day, I haven't got time to go and take the interviewer, and they wouldn't give me time to take the interviewer on a nice journey. And it'd be a total waste of my opportunity to talk about our position on Brexit or the NHS. I think that was a really frustrating thing. So I mean, you'd want to kind of just take people on a little bit of a journey. So do you understand what it is you're actually asking me? You understand what you mean by sin, for example? But those things were not possible. And I think, so there may well have been ways in which I could have dealt with that far more wisely. And so I never blame the media for it. I'm the Burke who was sat in the chair, and, you take responsibility for it. I think, and the reason why I determined that I wasn't going to continue as leader was because I just thought I had got myself into a situation where the focus was so much on my faith. I've either got to kind of water it down and basically, car crash my faith, or I've got to just, keep playing the straight bat and be a really crap leader. And that was the kind of binary view I came to.
And that was the main reason that you decided.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because we'd increased our number of seats by 4, but that was a 50% increase. We doubled the size of the party. We were doing pretty well. The election came too early for us. We'd won the Richmond Park by-election. We'd come from 4th to 2nd in Witney after David Cameron had stood down. I think if we believed in ourselves a bit more, we might have nicked that one. So things were going well. We were winning council by-elections every week. And the 2017 election came at a time we could have done with another year. Theresa May probably thinks that too as well now. But either way, so I think, I would have carried on otherwise. And in a sense, every leadership is modular. There are different stages you take the party through. My job was to stop us dying and give us something to believe in. And we did that. And there were other modules we could have taken us to afterwards. I didn't get the chance to do those.
How aware were you of what people were saying about you in the last 10 days of that campaign within the party?
Well, I know people thought it was embarrassing, and I know people thought that... the thing that I think probably broke through to me was the thought that I was being self-indulgent.
But you were hauled in for a meeting, weren't you?
No, I don't think so.
Well, I remember being told, I think this was actually before polling day, that you had been hauled in by the party president and one or two other grandees and read the Riot Act.
That is untrue. Totally untrue. It's funny what people say. Well, that never happened.
But this is the sort of thing that goes on in politics.
But it's worth bearing in mind that actually that campaign was just 7 weeks long. All the stuff, the kind of relentless focus on my faith really lasted for the first 10 days, and then people seemed to move on. I think it damaged me throughout the campaign and us as a result, but it was not a thing that really introduced itself into much of our discussions really for the last 5 weeks of the campaign. The focus was on the debates and... But
you did... Now, and again, I may be misremembering this, but in the original interview, you said that you thought that gay sex was a sin. You then backtracked on that a little bit, and then after the election, you regretted the backtracking.
I think in the end, what my real regret was just, giving a simplistic answer to what was a complex question. And
it's not a complex question, is it, though? The answer is no.
It is a complex question if it's been asked and you don't know what's the meaning of the phraseology that's
you know what sin means and you know what gay sex means.
And I don't think that... So sin is about an attitude towards God. It's not about a thing that you do. And that's the thing, so if we were having a lengthy conversation with people who are asking those questions during the campaign, that's the answer. And it's a
true cop-out, though, isn't it? Because if I said to you, is adultery wrong? Is it a sin? You would say yes.
So, and you can go through a whole long list of them. But I mean, in the same way that I never wanted to, get involved in providing clickbait then, I'm not going to now. But that's the sin is a thing that everybody is guilty of. And the notion that any one single group is to be set apart is theologically wrong and deeply offensive. And so I don't think that. And I think that the issue and why I think Jesus' message is so powerful is that it's utterly universal, and that there is nobody who is beyond redemption, no single human being of any background whatsoever. But sin, whatever one thinks it is, the broad concept of it, which is our alienation from God, must be serious. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken the God of the entire universe to die to pay the price for it.
You have generally voted pro-equality. I mean, I was reading about this the other day. That there were some votes that you were absent for. Was that a convenient subsequent appointment, like Boris Johnson going to Afghanistan?
It depends when they were, but
vote?
It's unlikely because let's be honest, particularly in my first term as MP, I spent more time in Westminster than I spent down here.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of absent votes on all sorts of issues.
But you did vote for equal marriage at various points.
Yeah.
So if you believe that 2 men or 2 women have the right to have a marriage, then presumably the question of gay sex being a sin isn't relevant anymore.
The point is we're in a free society and people should be able to make their choices and to live their lives. And so that's why I voted the way I did, and that's why I think I was right to do it.
But a lot of people find it difficult that somebody who is an avowed liberal, and your reputation is being on the centre-left of the Liberal Party, not the centre-right. A lot of people have difficulty in understanding why you just can't be totally unequivocal about these issues.
So here's an interesting perspective that it might be worth just considering. So let's just imagine there's a God for a moment. Let's just imagine. If that God endorses everything you already think, do and say and believe, you can be pretty sure that Dawkins is right. That God is a delusion. You've invented that God. If there's a real God, then you can be equally sure that that God will disturb, contradict, and challenge you to the very depth of who you are. And that's exactly how it is with me. And so there are many things in the Bible I find massively awkward and challenging, but I look at the cross and I see a God who loves me and who loves everybody, and so I'm prepared to trust him. I also think that we see a God who does not force us to follow him or to live lives that are adherent to the laws that he set out. So if God doesn't force people, I've got no right to do so. And so my perspective as a liberal is to defend people's right to make their choices, to live their lives and to be who they are, whilst, as a Christian, holding out what Jesus holds out, which is forgiveness for everything.
Awkward question coming up. Some of your colleagues have said to me in the past, the real reason why Tim Farron has difficulty with this issue is because he's like Michael Portillo. He had youthful experiences and there's a real inner conflict there. That's
not true. There you are. I know it's what people say, but it's not even remotely true.
Okay. Had to ask the question.
I wouldn't be, ashamed, embarrassed to say so if it was.
That's the question I would have asked you in 2017 if I
Well, no. So it's an easy one. No, that's not true.
Okay. What now? You've been an MP for 20 years. Your constituency is being a little bit carved up at the moment in the boundary. That may well change. Is there a part of you that thinks, how old are you?
I am 51.
You're 51. David Cameron sort of decides, I'm not sure he's the best example to use in this, but there are politicians are not old in this country. They're generally, it's a young person's game. But at the age of 51, or say you're 53 by the time the next election comes around, you've got time for another career. Have you thought that, well, actually, maybe this is the time to go and do something else?
Not particularly. I love what I do. I'm also mindful of the fact that, at some point I might need to go and do something else. And there are various things I guess I could do, but no plans at all. I write a lot. I love writing. I write, loads of articles. I've written one book. I'm writing another with some friends. And in my spare time, which I don't get very much of, I'm writing a novel, which is great fun. I've just committed a murder in my novel. Not me personally, but a Labour MP in 1978 has just killed somebody.
Fantastic. Well, of course, Ian Duncan Smith wrote a novel. I remember when I was running a bookshop, that didn't trouble the sales.
This might not much. Either. But I'm enjoying doing it.
But there are plenty of examples of politicians who have been very successful novelists. Edwina Currie, who sold millions.
Yep.
Anne Widdecombe.
Yep.
Douglas Hurd. So
Jeffrey Archer.
Jeffrey Archer. So you never know. But do you think that you will stick at it? I mean, at the moment,
so I love doing it. I don't feel like I'm elongating something that I ought to have given up. I tell you what I have been really blessed with is just variety. So this is my 5th Parliament. They've all been astonishingly different. So my first Parliament was the last Blair Brown Parliament, a good one to get your feet under the table because it was a comfortable government majority in opposition, and every vote wasn't critical. Term 2, the coalition. Term 3, I'm leader. Term 4, all the Brexit chaos. Term 5, well, here we are in the middle of a pandemic. And so it's only been 16 years so far, but it is not, any of it has been boring, and all of it very different. So, yeah, I don't in any way feel a desire to give up, not least because I just love serving my community. And it's not that no one else could do it, but, I humbly think I do it well.
Just to finish off, forget Liberal Democrats. Give me 3 names of MPs over the course of your 16 years in Parliament that maybe when you came into Parliament or your first impressions of them were, what a complete dick. And then you thought that somehow you've grown a huge amount of respect for them.
I hope I don't think the former about any of them, really.
Yes, you do.
But there are lots of people who who I absolutely have grown to think well of. Let me think who they might be. I mean, think the danger is, of course, my friendships with non-Lib Dem politicians broadly with Christians. So there's that list could just simply be all of those people. I mean, the kind of people I've really admired from other parties, I've just considered to be just straightforward, decent, no nonsense. Alan Johnson. He wouldn't surprise me. You wouldn't be surprised to hear me say that. But as a health secretary from another political party who didn't need to do me or my patch any favours whatsoever, he did. He was great, really attentive. And I know, talking to other backbenchers from other parties, including Conservatives at the time, they thought the same about him. So I think those people who hold office and don't play the party politics game too much, you've got to have a reasonably high regard for. I think I say the same for Jeremy Hunt, another health minister. Obviously, when I won in 2005, I think we were trying to win his seat. He was he was a first-time candidate, or at least first for that seat, and we got about 1,000 votes off winning it. So every reason to be hostile towards him and all the rest of it. But I thought he was very straightforward, very reasonable, very thoughtful, and cared about doing the job in an effective and competent way. And let me see if I can find anybody else who I think well of from another political party. I was up against Hilary Benn a lot towards the end of his time as DEFRA secretary and the end of the Labour government. And again, somebody who was just decent, engaging. I mean, I don't know how ambitious he ever was, really, but somebody who just effortlessly breezed grace. And that's a hard thing to fake.
Well, I'd love to talk for longer, but I've got a trade minister to interview in about 5 minutes.
Very good.
So we're going to have to leave it here, Tim. Thanks for being so open. Been really enjoyable talking to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Iain.
Well, join us again next time for another edition of Iain Dale All Talk. Goodbye.